John Jones, and he's talking about World War II. Could you tell me what life was like before the war?
Very simple. I mean, you didn't have a lot of worries about anything. You know, we were we lived on a farm, and we'd go to school every day like kids do today. And there wasn't really a lot of anything going on like, well, we lived in a farming community, so there wasn't anything like today where they have so many kids that have access to drugs and all that stuff. We didn't have that. So I guess the worst thing you could say that we had was cigarettes. And you know, that's about all it was. So we just had an ordinary life. We'd go to school every day and come home every night and did the farm chores and things like that. So nobody had any fears about anything until Pearl Harbor happened.
Right. How long have you lived in Oxford?
I've been here, it will be 50 years on the 5th day of July. I will have been in the same house.
It's a long time. Where were you when you first heard about Pearl Harbor?
I was in high school. I was in the study hall. And it happened on December the 7th, 1941. And one of the first things we got was, I don't know who sent it or how come they got to it so quickly, but Robert Walker was the first one that was killed from my hometown, and he got it in that first raid that they made at Pearl Harbor. So when we heard about that, everybody was getting, you know, really like patriotic back then. I mean, it isn't too much that way now, but back then everybody was patriotic. Everybody wanted to get in and wanted to do something to help. So everybody was talking about when they were going to join up and when they were going to join up. And so as soon as June came and I graduated from high school, then I joined up too. So
How did your friends and family react to that?
they were all patriotic too. They didn't want to see their sons go, but they didn't want the Japanese to come over and take over the United States either. So
Right.
so that's, you know,
And so you enlisted. And what part did you enlist in?
I got into the Marine Corps on June the 10th, 1943. Now I had to see when Pearl Harbor happened, it was in '91, but I wasn't old enough then. And so when I graduated from high school in '43, then I was old enough, so I got in, and that's when I went in.
Okay. Do you remember exactly what age you were at that time?
My age at that time?
Yeah, when you went in.
Well, I was supposed to graduate like everybody else at the age of 18, but when I was little, my dad had the Great Depression came along. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So my dad was without a job, and so he had heard that he could find work at this plantation that the man owned in Arkansas, where he grew a lot of cotton. So he went down there and got a job with that guy, and he moved us down there. But when he moved us all down there, my dad at that time had 6 children, and I was the youngest. And I was just 6 years old. I was supposed to enter school that year, because then they didn't have kindergarten, so you didn't go in at the age of 5. You went in into first grade at the age of 6. Well, it was a small country town, and they didn't have a very big schoolhouse, and their school term had already started when we arrived, and they wouldn't allow my dad to enroll his 6 kids in school because they said it was already too crowded. Small school. Well, anyway, we missed the entire year. So when I did start the school, I was 7. Therefore, when I graduated, I was 19 instead of 18 like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So at the age of 19, then in June of '43, I went in the Marine Corps.
Do you remember, what did you do for basic training?
We went to San Diego Naval Training Station. They call it a naval training station, but it's a Marine recruit station, actually, is what it is. And we went through basic training there at what we called boot camp instead of basic training. In the Army, it's called basic training. In the Marine Corps and in the Navy, it's called boot camp, because you wore these boots up over your, up over your pants. And there's a reason for that too, because when you go out training on the boondocks, you get a lot of sand fleas and burrs on your legs, so good thing you got those on. But anyway, we went through that boot camp for 12 weeks, and then when we graduated from there, we were sent wherever they wanted us to go, or wherever we asked to go. They did give us a choice, and since I had a class in high school of aircraft mechanics, they wanted to know if anybody wanted to go into the Marine Air Wing, and I elected to do that. So they sent me to a aircraft training station that are, training people to be aircraft mechanics, and that's what I was, an aircraft mechanic.
Wow. What is your fondest memory of training camp?
Would you ask that again?
What is your fondest memory of like the boot camp or the training?
My fondest memory?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't too fond of any of it, really. It was pretty tough, pretty tough. But I rather liked the obstacle courses.
Yeah.
Because I'd been raised on a farm, and I wasn't a very big man, but I was always pretty strong. So I liked the obstacle courses, climbing over the walls and swinging the ropes across the muddy holes. There was quite a few guys couldn't make it across those muddy holes. They'd drop right in the middle, and that was always a comical situation when they'd drop in that mud and have to crawl out. But yeah, I rather enjoyed that.
Did you receive any special training or like weapons special training?
No, everybody that got into the Marine Corps took the same training in boot camp. And if you had any special training, it was if you went into a special unit. And they did have some special units, like the Rangers. At the Army had the Rangers. Well, the Marine Corps had what they call C School. And if you went into that, you got extra special training, sort of like they give today to the SEALs, the Navy SEALs, and the Army Rangers. Well, the Marine C School was the same way. They gave special training. But what I did after boot camp, instead of going to one of those bases, I went to the Naval Air Technical Training Center in Norman, Oklahoma, where they taught aircraft mechanics. And so I took that training.
Okay. So, were you in the European or Pacific theater?
Pacific.
And how did you reach the place where you were stationed? How did you reach the place where you were stationed?
How did I reach it?
Yeah.
You mean overseas?
Yeah.
Well, we embarked at San Diego and went first to Pearl Harbor. That's the first time that I had been there, and as we went into the harbor, all of the ships that had been sunk were still sitting there with their masts sticking out of the water, and it's not like it is today where they have a big memorial with the Arizona there and everything. Mm-hmm. They didn't have that then. Ships were just in all different stages of where they had sunk. That's where they were, and so we went in there and laid over for 5 days waiting for the rest of the ships, because they were all bringing people to make up the convoy. A convoy of maybe as high as 40 or 50 ships hauling all the different people heading toward your destination. Well, our destination at that time was the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. So we went not in the South Pacific. It's actually about 11 degrees north of the equator. But that's where we went down there, and they were kind of halfway like mopping up operations. They had already taken some of the islands, and some of them they hadn't, and some of them they bypassed and didn't even attempt to take them because they weren't of any importance. So we went there by ship.
Do you have any memories of or stories about that trip over?
Well, the trip over was very dull in a way. We didn't run into any enemy, except one time we were alerted that they had sighted a submarine. And of course everybody was running under cover of darkness then, and nobody was allowed to light a cigarette or anything. If you were up on the deck and you lit a cigarette, you were in trouble. So they kept lights off, and they had the the ones that were supposed to have the boats that were equipped with sonar, supposed to be able to detect the subs. They were fanned out and going, and we were all just on a transport troop ship, what I was on, and so nothing happened. We got over there okay, and there wasn't any ships sunk or anything at that time, so we made it okay.
Oh, that's good. Can you describe what everyday living was like overseas?
Overseas, well, you had quite a strenuous day because everybody had different duties, and our duty was to take care of the planes, of course, and so we had round the clock. There were 3 shifts of people. We would be sleeping while some other guys were working at the planes or at the hangars. You had to keep those planes in readiness all the time, and so there was such things as changing tires, such things as doing a maybe 50-hour check on the engine, where you'd have to put a tent over it so that there wouldn't be any outside lights to show the enemy planes that you were down there. So we had to have this tent over the engine part of the plane, and have these step ladders that were tall enough for you to allow you to reach the engine, take all the cowling off the engine and get in there and work on it, repair whatever you had to, whether it was oil lines or whatever, you had to repair it. So we did that, and then you had also to pull guard duty on your off hours. If you were on the guard duty list, you had to pull guard duty too. And just because you pulled guard duty for 3 or 4 hours at night didn't mean you wasn't supposed to be at that airfield in the morning. So it was quite strenuous. You'd have to do that too. And so everything went pretty well as long as we were in the marshals. And we just sent our planes out, and they would bomb the outlying Japanese-held islands, and they'd come back. Well, occasionally there would be one of them get shot down or something, and I remember especially one day when one of the pilots had dropped his bomb and had come in pretty low when he dropped it, and as he was pulling away, some ground fire got him, and it shot the side of his eye out right here. Some bullets went through the cockpit, and it didn't shoot him. Just one bullet just knocked this bone out of his eye socket, and his eye dropped out and was hanging down here on the cord. But he was bleeding and everything, and the shock of getting hit that way was pretty bad. And he kept talking to the other guys, and they kept talking to him, trying to just make sure he stayed awake. And he flew back at something like 160 miles from that island, and he flew back and circled the field and landed that plane and cut the engine off. And when we got out there with the crash wagon, what we called crash wagon, it was like an ambulance that went to pick up anybody that could be taken to the hospital. And when we got out there, he was passed out in the cockpit.
Wow.
So he just used willpower to do it. And they sent him back to Guam, where there was a field hospital, and I never saw him again. So I imagine that they were able to help him, but I don't know.
Yeah, he probably sent him home.
But I watched the corpsman, what we called a corpsman. He was what you'd call now an emergency technician, medical technician. Mm-hmm. He took the eye and put it back in the socket as best he could, stuffed it in there, and took a piece of tape and taped it so it would stay. And then they got him out of the cockpit, put him on a stretcher, and put him in the meat wagon and took him off. So later that day, they got him on the plane and flew him back to Guam, and I never saw him, but I guess he got okay.
That's good.
I sure hope so.
Were you involved in any of the air raids or anything? Like, did you fly?
The only thing I was involved in personally was when we made the invasion at Okinawa. The aircraft was flown out and landed on an aircraft carrier with our pilots, and we went in with the line company. I mean, the line company is the infantry. So we went in with the Marine Division that was going to go in and fight on the ground. So we went in with them, just like one of them, because we were all trained with the same way anyhow. And some of the islands, as soon as you hit the shore, you hit resistance, where they would try to to mow down the men as they come ashore. At Okinawa, it wasn't like that. We were a mile inland before we met any resistance at all. But there was some funny things that happened, though. But anyway, we got him about a mile inland and then began to hit some resistance. And from then on until we took an airfield, when we took Yontan Field, well, then our planes, then our Seabees came and laid down landing strips because they were, I don't know how they landed on that field because it was muddy then. And the Japanese, I mean. But evidently they were using the field. It had been cleared off and had coral and everything that they were using, I guess, to land on. But during muddy season or rainy season, it wasn't sufficient. So our Seabees came in and laid down landing strips made out of this woven. You may have seen long strips of metal about this wide and maybe 15, 20 feet long with holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's called a landing strip because that's what we used them for. They lay down a lot of those and the planes could land on them. So after we got the airfield secured, they brought the planes in from the aircraft carrier and started landing at the field, and then we started operating from that field.
What were the guys you worked with like? Did you get really close to any of them?
Yes.
Okay. How
That's kind of a, it brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful to God because I can cry. But when I was in the Marine Corps, I could not cry. I came home, nothing affected me. I didn't cry a bit. And I was that way for 10 years. But then you get married, you have your children, you start going to church, and you realize there's something there better than us. And so you begin to believe in God, you begin to do different things. And now I cry pretty easy when I remember some of that stuff. Back then it didn't bother me. I'd step over a dead person just as if it was a log and go ahead. It didn't bother you. And now I remember some of my buddies that got killed and it makes me cry. So I don't know.
Would you mind if I asked you like what kind of things you guys did for fun when you were over there?
I didn't hear that.
Would you mind if I asked what you guys did for fun when you were over there?
Well, we used to take excursions around the island, a part of the island that was secured and behind the lines, and we'd get an occasional day off. So a bunch of us would get together and we'd go on excursions around the island and go to see things. And there was quite interesting things on Okinawa. One thing I noticed was that everything was smaller. The only thing I saw of a normal size over there in the animal kingdom was goats. Their goats were the same size of ours, but their cattle were smaller than ours, and their horses were smaller than ours. And the people were smaller than ours. So it's just, kind of an odd thing. But we got to see a lot of things, and it was kind of a pretty island if you went to places where it wasn't torn up by shells and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty nice. So we had fun doing that, but there wasn't really that many fun days.
What were the people in the country, what were they like that lived there?
Well, they were farmers, and believe it or not, I've seen a lady, I guess it was probably prevalent over the whole island, but I only saw it happen once. They would the people would leave their community, which was a little kind of a village, and they'd go out into the rice paddies and the different places to work all day. And the women went right along with the men. And this one lady was pregnant, and you could tell it very much. And she went out to work and came home that night with a baby on her back. She had had her baby out there in the field while they was working. And they put it in they got the clothes on it or whatever they had, and they carried their babies on their back like a papoose. And she had this baby on her back, little tiny baby, and she brought that baby back at the end of the day back into the village. And so they were pretty hardy people, I think. But we found them to be okay. They had been oppressed by the Japanese, but they were glad we were there. And so everything was working pretty good.
That's good. How long were you there?
From April '45 until till the war ended in August of '85, and then we flew to Japan in September of '45 to occupy Japan. So I got to fly up there. And incidentally, did you ever hear of a movie star named Tyrone Power?
Mm-mm.
Well, he was one of the guys that flew the planes up there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so when we got we went to Yokosuka, what they call if you could visualize Tokyo Bay, you got Tokyo over here, and Yokohama down here, and Yokosuka across the bay. Although it's the Japanese pronounce it Yokosuka. They put the accent in a different place, and we call it Yokosuka, but it's Yokosuka. So we landed there, and we were stationed at what had been their airfield, so we took that airfield. And while I was there, I got to see what Jimmy Doolittle did to Tokyo. He and his bunch of bombers, there was a full 1/4 of that city was just nothing but rubble. He did quite a job on it. But and Yokohama was flattened, but Yokosuka was not flattened, and that's where we were stationed, so it's okay.
Did you move up in rank at all?
Pardon?
Like throughout your Army experience, did you move up in rank
I was just a corporal.
the whole time?
I went over as a private first class and came back as a corporal. One rank.
Something. Did you receive lots of medals?
Yeah, we got a few medals. Most of them are like the American medal. Everybody gets that. It goes in, whether you go overseas or not. You get the American medal, and the well, let's see here. I've forgotten myself. And incidentally, I was in the 2nd Marine Air Wing. The American campaign was called anybody who got into the service was in the American campaign, whether they went overseas or not. This one here was the Asiatic Pacific campaign, and the stars denoted how many battles you were in while you were over there, you know. And then this one here was, I'll have to read it. That's World War II medal. That's okay. That's another medal that everybody gets. If you were in World War II and served outside the country, you got that medal whether you were in any battles or not. And the one down here, I can't even read that. Can you read that? I can't see what it says. My eyes are not that good anymore. And I've forgotten. Well, anyway, I think that's the Asian. It means that you were in the Asian region, but you don't get a star there on that one because you weren't, you know, you get that medal, but you only get a star in it if you, this was Asian region, this was Asiatic Pacific campaign, but we got a presidential unit citation also. Our whole unit got a citation, so that's another couple of stars. So that's, you know, and I can't get in that thing anymore. It's too, I tried to put it on this morning because Brian's dad said, he called me and said he wants to see you in that uniform or something. I can't get that thing on, it's too small. So I'm not very big now, but I wasn't very big at all there, I guess.
What do you remember about VE and VJ Day?
The one thing I remember about that day is that the war was over, but there were some Japanese planes in the air on their way for an airstrike. And they were still in the air when the war was declared at an end. And yet, after the war was over, I was walking guard duty at Kadena Airfield. And we got an air raid after the war was over. And that was a fact. They came in there and bombed us that night, and the war was over.
How did they react? How did your unit react to that?
Well, one guy was coming down across the field with his headlights on in a Jeep, him and his buddy, and I halted him, told him to put those lights out. Well, the war's over. Said, we just got word a while ago. I said, I can't help that. You put the lights out. I got my orders. If you don't put them out, I'll shoot them out. So they put the lights out, and sure enough, these planes come over and bombed right after that. So I guess they figured it, you know, they figured the war was over. It's okay, but it didn't turn out that way.
Wow.
But yet, it was quite a thrill too, because the war ended. You knew it wouldn't be very long. You'd be able to go home, and so
Yeah.
it was a big thrill.
When you returned home, I bet your family was really happy to see you.
Yes.
Must have been a good day.
Yep. It was really a good day.
What do you remember, like, when you were first arrived back?
When I first arrived back,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that surprised me was. Now I have to take you back to a little bit, because when we were overseas and in the tropics, it's prevalent for people to have to come down with malaria fever, and they didn't have any cure against it at that time, but they had what they called atabrine pills, and everybody would take one of these atabrine pills every day, and that would not prevent you from taking malaria, but it would prevent you from coming down sick enough that you couldn't function, and so. But little by little, it turned your skin a yellowish color, and you didn't know it because all your buddies were the same way, and so you never noticed it. But as we pulled into the dock at San Jose, California, the Red Cross and those people were on the dock, and he was going to serve us coffee when we come off. And when we come up on deck and started to go down the gangplank, and I looked at all these people on the dock, and I thought, gee, they're white. They're whiter than we are. And turned around and looked at my buddies, and all of us, I could tell then, from looking at them and looking at us, we all looked yellow. And it was kind of a funny thing. But anyhow, it was nice to get off the boat.
What do you think that today's youth should know about World War II?
Pardon?
What do you think today's youth should know about World War II?
I'm still not understanding.
What do you think today, like, kids like us, what do you think we should know about World War II?
Well, it's, I think it should be made known to the whole United States that, yes, it is bad to think that we've got a couple thousand guys killed over in Afghanistan. But when you consider that war against World War II, there is no comparison. Just in our Marine Air Wing alone, we had 38,000 people killed. Just in the Marine Air.
Oh.
Now, if you go into the Navy casualties and then take the Army casualties and add it all up, there was a lot, and there's not hardly anybody alive today that remembers World War II. And so they think they're going through a really bad thing over here, but they're really not. The casualties in Afghanistan and in Iraq are really, they're bad, but they're really not a drop in a bucket to how many men were lost in World War II. So it's,
It needs to be remembered.
people should remember that, and they should be patriotic enough to support the United States in trying to suppress people like Saddam, rather than trying to be a Bush basher. They're always bashing Bush for every time that he makes a decision. But I think he's a strong leader myself. I think that he's trying, and so, it's like, what if Franklin Roosevelt had said, well, let's go to the negotiating table and see if we can settle this peacefully, after they'd bombed Pearl Harbor. The whole country would have had him out of office. They would say, hey, they bombed Pearl Harbor and they did it, let's go over there and get them. So they did. I mean, he declared war, and that's exactly what he should have done. If he'd have sat back at the negotiating table, that would have just given the Japanese time to get over here and bomb the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you have people come along like Saddam Hussein, you've got to do something about it, And I think that Bush is trying to do the best he can.
Well, thank you for talking with us today. That's all the questions I have for you.
I'm glad to have been able to do it. I don't really, I can't remember some of the things. And on the other hand, I could sit here and talk all day, but I know you won't, you want to hear that. So anyway, I've enjoyed it.